My future daughter-in-law abandoned my son when she thought my family only rented our home and farm. But on her wedding day, I was the first man to arrive to collect a debt. The sharp click of high heels slammed against the rotting wooden floor. Elena stepped into my house like she was walking through a landfill. She pinched her nose with 2 fingers, her heavily lined eyes sweeping across my worn living room in disgust. Rodri had lived here for more than 30 years. To her, it looked like a filthy livestock shed. To me, it was the birthplace of an empire. Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. Grab yourself a drink, maybe a snack, get comfortable, and remember this: everyone in these stories had every opportunity to do the right thing. They just chose otherwise. Leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe. Trust me, you're going to love it here. Fergus walked in behind her, guilt written all over his face. He glanced at me standing there in muddy work overalls. I had just finished checking the irrigation system out in the back fields. Elena looked down at her designer heels. A tiny speck of mud had splashed onto the bright red sole. She shrieked like she'd been bitten by a snake. "Oh my God, Fergus, look at this place," Elena snapped. "You told me I was meeting your father at some kind of mansion. Why are we in this disgusting little swamp shack?" Her eyes slid toward me with open contempt. "You're Fergus's father. You look more like a cheap farmhand." I calmly leaned my shovel against the wall. Then I poured a glass of water from the old ceramic pitcher and looked directly into the eyes of the woman my son wanted to marry. Beautiful eyes. Empty eyes. The kind that only sparkled when money was involved. "Welcome, Elena," I said evenly. "I'm glad you came to visit the family farm." "The family farm," she scoffed. She wiped the mud off her shoe with a tissue and tossed it directly onto my floor. "This place is a nightmare. Fergus, I can't believe you brought me here. Do you have any idea how expensive this dress is?" Fergus awkwardly reached for her hand. "Elena, my father likes a simple life. It's peaceful here. Peaceful, or just poor." She jerked her hand away. "I don't care. I want to leave immediately." I stayed silent and watched. The vulture had finally shown itself the moment it realized the prey wasn't wrapped in luxury. What she didn't know was that beneath the dirt and worn boots stood the man who controlled her future. The story was only beginning. The humiliation she threw at me that day would become the most expensive mistake of her life. She thought she was the hunter. In reality, she was nothing more than a puppet waiting for the curtain to fall. Soon enough, Elena would learn something people like her never understand. Money can buy elegance, but it can never buy vision. Dinner began under a tension so thick you could almost hear Fergus's heartbeat. I served the finest steaks from the farm alongside a bottle of unlabeled red wine. To me, it was the reward of honest labor. To Elena, it was an insult. She picked up her fork like she was handling a contaminated object. After cutting a tiny piece of meat and placing it into her mouth, her face twisted immediately. Elena spat it straight into her white napkin. "This meat is as tough as rubber." She slammed the fork onto the plate with a sharp metallic clang. "Do you people even know how to buy proper food? In the city we eat imported premium beef. This," she sneered at the steak, "looks like meat from some dying old cow." I quietly took another sip of wine. Fergus looked at me helplessly. He quickly cut another piece and offered it to her. "Try this one, maybe that piece was overcooked." My father prepared everything carefully. Elena ignored him completely. She lifted the wine glass, took a small sip, then instantly spat it back into the glass. "This wine tastes like poison." "Which discount store did you buy it from?" She waved the glass with disgust. "The air in this place feels exactly the same. Cheap and suffocating." Then she stood and slowly walked around the small living room. Her sharp eyes stopped at the antique painting hanging on the wooden wall behind me. I noticed her pupils widen instantly. The instincts of a gold digger had awakened. She stepped closer and brushed her red-painted fingernail along the faded gold frame. "Is this real or fake?" Elena asked, her voice suddenly hungry with ambition. "If it's real, then it's probably the only valuable thing inside this dump." A faint smile crossed my face. "It belonged to my wife," I replied calmly. "To me it's priceless. But to Elena, everything had a price tag." She turned toward me again, this time with a colder, more calculating tone. "Listen, old man. Fergus and I are getting married soon. We are not living out here in the middle of nowhere." She crossed her arms confidently. "After the wedding, we're selling all of this. The fields, the cattle, this rotting wooden shack. We need real capital for serious investments in the city. Manual labor is for people without intelligence. Fergus nearly dropped his spoon. Elena, what are you talking about? This farm is my father's life's work. She looked at him with open contempt. You expect me to spend my life married to a farmer, she snapped. Wake up. This land is a gold mine if we sell it at the right time. I slowly placed my wine glass onto the table. My eyes locked onto the darkness hiding behind her beautiful face. In that moment I realized I no longer needed to convince Fergus of anything. Elena was destroying herself perfectly well on her own, but she still didn't know the truth. She was trying to place a value on property she believed belonged to me. What she could never imagine was that my real plan was far more terrifying than anything her greedy little mind could comprehend. Her greed was the key that would unlock the gates of hell around her. I glanced at the antique painting, then over at my son, and in silence I made my decision. It was finally time for the man she called unintelligent to teach her the most expensive financial lesson of her entire life. That night, the air inside the wooden house grew so heavy it felt like the calm before a violent storm. Elena had finally gone to bed after unleashing another endless rant about the poor quality of my blankets and bedsheets. Only Fergus and I remained beside the dying fireplace. My son sat there with his head lowered, his hands tightly clasped together in anxiety. "Dad, I'm sorry." Fergus's voice cracked as he finally broke the silence. "Elena doesn't mean any harm. She just grew up surrounded by luxury, so she has a strong personality. She's just not used to life out here yet." I stared quietly into the flames. Inside them I could almost see my wife again. She had built this empire beside me with her own 2 hands. She had never once complained about the smell of dirt on my clothes or the mud on my boots. A slow sigh escaped my chest. "Fergus," I said softly, "you call that a strong personality. I call it cruelty." I looked directly at him. "That woman does not look at you with love. She looks at you like a ticket into high society. You don't understand her." Fergus shot back, finally lifting his head. His eyes were red with frustration. "She stayed beside me when things were difficult. She loves me for who I am." A bitter smile crossed my face. "Are you sure?" I asked quietly. "Or does she love you because she believes you're the sole heir to this farm?" I leaned back in my chair. "Have you ever wondered what would happen if tomorrow we lost everything?" Fergus said nothing. His stubbornness twisted like a knife inside my chest. I already knew advice would not save him. People in love rarely notice the cliff waiting beneath their feet. If I forced him to leave Elena, he would resent me forever. I needed another way. A financial test. That was the only answer. Better for my son to suffer once and survive than spend his entire life married to a vulture waiting to strip this family to the bone. "All right," I finally said as I stood up and placed a hand on Fergus's shoulder. "Tomorrow morning we're having a family meeting. I have something important to tell both of you." I paused. "Something that will completely change our future." Fergus looked up nervously. "What kind of news?" "You'll find out tomorrow." Then I turned and walked toward my bedroom. Lying on the old wooden bed that night, I stared at the ceiling while the entire plan formed clearly in my mind. I wasn't just going to test their love. I was building a trap so perfect that greedy people like Elena would never escape it. She wanted to sell this farm. Fine. I was about to show her who truly owned it. But even I could not predict how horrifying Elena's reaction would be the next morning. A storm was coming for this house, and once it passed, not a single lie would survive the wreckage. What would Elena do when she discovered the man she planned to marry was nothing more than a drowning debtor? The truth behind my financial test was about to leave everyone speechless. The next morning, sunlight poured through the windows, illuminating tiny particles of dust drifting through the air. I sat at the head of the dining table, while Fergus and Elena sat across from me. Elena's face carried an unmistakable look of satisfaction. She probably believed I was about to hand them a will, or announce some enormous inheritance. I took a slow breath. The tension in the room was so thick that even a falling pin would have sounded deafening. "Listen carefully, both of you," I began, forcing the saddest tone I could manage. "There's something I've hidden from you for a very long time." I lowered my eyes. "This farm, this house, none of it actually belongs to us." Elena froze instantly. The smile vanished from her lips. "What did you just say?" she asked sharply. "What do you mean it's not yours?" I slid a stack of fake documents across the table. "The truth is, our family has only been caretakers here for decades. We leased this land from a large financial corporation." I sighed heavily. Business has collapsed. Right now, I owe them $500,000 in accumulated interest. And every month we still have to pay another $10,000 in rent just to keep this old house. Fergus pretended to break down perfectly. He buried his face in his hands. Why didn't you tell me sooner, Dad? I thought we were doing fine. Elena shot to her feet so violently that the wooden chair crashed backward onto the floor. $500,000, she screamed. $10,000 a month for this pigsty. She pointed wildly around the room. Are you people insane? You're frauds. Her eyes burned with fury now. The contempt she had shown yesterday had transformed into pure rage. So that calm little act of yours was just hiding all this rot, she snapped at me. I thought Fergus was some wealthy farm heir. I wasted my time on a man drowning in debt. Elena, I'm sorry. Fergus reached toward her, but she recoiled instantly as though he carried a deadly disease. Don't touch me, she shouted. You pathetic broke loser. What did you plan to trap me here so I could help pay off your disgusting family debts? Her voice rose higher with every word. Did you expect me to work myself to death just to pay rent for this filthy dump? I stared directly into her bloodshot eyes. Every trace of fake sweetness had disappeared. What remained was the raw face of a brutally practical woman whose loyalty existed only where money survived. I kept my expression painfully calm. If the two of you still get married, I said quietly, we can work together to repay everything. If we live carefully, maybe in 10 years we'll recover. 10 years, Elena let out a shrill laugh. Then she slammed her designer handbag onto the table. I am not wasting 10 years of my life buried in mud with people like you. She grabbed her coat furiously. You're all nothing but cheap liars. I refuse to let myself rot in this place. Then she turned and stormed toward the front door. Her footsteps moved quickly, desperately, like someone escaping a burning building. But I already knew this storm had only begun. Elena wasn't just leaving. She was planning something far uglier. Something cruel enough to punish us for what she considered a waste of her precious time. And as the front door opened, I noticed someone waiting beside the gate outside the farm. A man. A stranger. And the moment Elena rushed toward him, I realized another vicious plan was already unfolding right in front of us. Elena stood in the middle of the living room like a trapped animal cornered with nowhere left to run. Her beautiful face twisted with rage as she looked at me, then at Fergus with undisguised disgust. You pathetic cowards, she hissed through clenched teeth. A whole family of broke little scammers. You really thought you could trick someone like me into becoming a slave to your debts with this fake respectable act? Fergus slowly rose to his feet, his face drained of color. Elena, I truly love you, he pleaded. Money isn't everything. We can start over together. Love. Elena burst into laughter. The sound was sharp and cold like shattered glass. Who do you think I am? She snapped. I was not born to spend my life smelling cow manure and chewing rubber steaks. Her eyes burned with contempt. I am not wasting my youth on a man who doesn't even own a house. Then she reached up and ripped the engagement ring from her finger. The sparkling diamond was something Fergus had spent years saving for. Without the slightest hesitation, Elena hurled the ring directly into the plate of leftover food. The sharp metallic clink echoed across the room as the ring landed among scraps of half-eaten beef and cheap sauce. Take this garbage back, she spat onto the floor. It's exactly like your family. Fake and worthless. At that exact moment, the sound of a car horn blasted repeatedly from outside the farm gate. A bright red sports car rolled into the driveway. Then a man stepped out. He wore a polished designer suit and dark sunglasses that hid half his face. Elena didn't bother looking back at us even once. She grabbed her designer handbag and strode across the muddy yard in her high heels without hesitation. Then she ran straight into the arms of the stranger. The man wrapped an arm around her waist and smiled smugly. Julie and Elena purred sweetly. Your timing is perfect. Get me out of this disgusting hellhole. I stood quietly in the doorway as the sports car disappeared into a cloud of dust. Behind me, Fergus collapsed onto his knees. He stared blankly at the engagement ring sitting in the plate of leftovers, while tears rolled onto his rough hands. Dad, he whispered weakly. I was wrong, wasn't I? I didn't answer. I simply walked over, picked up the ring, carefully wiped away the grease and dirt, and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Then I looked toward the road, where the sports car had vanished. A faint smile slowly crossed my face. Elena believed she had just found her savior. A young millionaire ready to carry her into paradise. But she had no idea who Julian really was. And she certainly didn't know that I was the one who had sent that so-called millionaire to her, at the exact moment she was most desperate. Her little performance had only entered its second act. Elena was now walking willingly into a trap far more sophisticated than anything she could imagine. A trap where she was no longer the hunter, but helpless prey, delivering itself straight into the jaws of the wolf. Only 1 week after storming out of the wooden farmhouse in disgust, Elena had already launched her revenge campaign across social media. I sat inside my real office in the center of the city, a massive glass-walled space overlooking the entire valley below. On the computer screen in front of me was the profile page of my former future daughter-in-law. She had posted a photo sitting on a luxury yacht holding an expensive glass of champagne beside Julian. The caption dripped with mockery. Finally escaped the muddy ruin. Never let broke scammers drag you down. Choose people on your level. I scrolled lower. Thousands of likes. Thousands of comments praising her. Elena was living inside the illusion of a brand new paradise. She flaunted designer handbags, 5-star dinners, luxury shopping trips. She wanted the world to believe she had won. More importantly, she wanted to rub salt into the wound she imagined Fergus was suffering through. Fergus stood beside me, silently staring at the screen. But the pain in his eyes from last week was gone. In its place was something far calmer. "They look happy, don't they?" Fergus said quietly. I smiled faintly and took another sip of black coffee. "Happiness built on borrowed numbers is very easy to fake," I replied. "Do you see the watch Julian is wearing?" I zoomed in on the image. "That's a limited edition model financed through our company. I signed the repossession order this morning. He's already 3 months behind on payments." Every photograph Elena posted, every designer item she carried, every luxury trip she bragged about, all of it was debt wrapped in beautiful packaging. Julian was not a millionaire. He was a professional borrower who built a glamorous image using money he never owned. He hunted wealthy targets with fake success stories and rented luxury. And this time he believed Elena was the perfect victim, a woman supposedly connected to a valuable farm inheritance. Elena laughed online and called us scammers. But she had no idea she was sinking into something far uglier than anything she accused us of. She was building a sandcastle directly on top of a volcano waiting to erupt. I shut off the computer screen. Then I opened the drawer beside me and pulled out a thick red file. Inside was the debtor registry for Rodri Financial Group. Julian's name appeared on the very first page. The debt attached to his account was enormous, large enough to send him to prison if he failed to pay before the deadline. Julian's entire plan was simple: use Elena to gain access to my farmland. He believed the property would eventually belong to her, after marriage. What he never realized was that the land had never belonged to Elena, and it never would. I turned toward the glass windows, as the city lights slowly flickered to life beneath the evening sky. Elena's endless social media bragging had become the greatest evidence I could possibly ask for. The more proudly she displayed her fantasy life, the more devastating the fall would become. Right now, Elena was still drowning in dreams of luxury and status. She was already preparing to announce the wedding of the century. What she didn't know was that the most important guest at that wedding would be me, not as the father of her ex-fiancé, but as the largest creditor her future husband had ever feared. I flipped through Julian's financial files 1 page at a time. Bright red debt figures danced beneath the office lights. The man was an expert at building glamorous illusions, but beneath the polished suits and luxury cars stood nothing more than a debtor balancing on the edge of financial collapse. Julian owed my finance company $3 million. For months, he had used every trick imaginable to delay repayment. And now, he was betting everything on Elena. Why Elena? The answer was painfully obvious. Julian believed my family owned hundreds of acres of priceless farmland. He believed every arrogant fantasy Elena had bragged about online regarding the massive inheritance she expected to receive after marriage. He wasn't falling in love with her. He was positioning her. Julian planned to use Elena as a shield against his debts. He seduced her carefully, then convinced her to sign loan guarantee papers under the excuse of supporting their future business investments. Poor Elena. She believed she was entering high society. She thought Julian was the rescue boat carrying her away from mud cattle and country life. In reality, she was chaining herself to a 1,000-pound anchor. She was building a castle of sand directly above a volcano, and I was the man holding the detonator. I called Fergus into my office and handed him a copy of the debt guarantee contract Julian had tricked Elena into signing earlier that morning. My private investigator had delivered it within the hour. Look closely, I told him calmly. She just signed her own financial death sentence. Fergus stared down at the document in shock. She really has no idea, he asked quietly. She's too blinded by greed to notice the trap, I answered. She never bothered reading the contract because she was too busy dreaming about luxury parties and mansions. I leaned back slowly in my chair. Elena thinks she found a wealthy savior. In truth, she became prey for a far more dangerous predator. And that predator, I added softly, happens to owe me millions. Then I picked up the phone and called the chief attorney of Rodri Financial Group. Prepare the seizure orders immediately, I said coldly. I want every document ready on their wedding day. I paused. Not 1 minute earlier. Not 1 minute later. Everything was finally in place for the greatest performance of my life. Julian believed he could use Elena to gain access to my assets. Elena believed she had finally secured herself a real millionaire. In reality, both of them were greedy parasites lying to each other while standing on collapsing ground. What Julian didn't realize was that every luxury dinner he bought for Elena, every designer handbag, every yacht trip, every sparkling gift, had all been financed using money borrowed directly from my rough company. He was using my own money to seduce my former future daughter-in-law. The irony was almost beautiful. I turned toward the city skyline as darkness slowly covered the valley below. Soon, wedding music would fill an extravagant ballroom somewhere across this city. Guests would laugh. Champagne would pour. Elena would smile proudly in a white dress, believing she had conquered the world. And then, I would walk through those doors like a ghost from the past, not to give blessings, but to collect every single dollar they owed me. The wedding of the century was held inside the most luxurious ballroom in the city. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in shimmering light, while towering arrangements of white lilies lined the marble aisle. Elena stood proudly in the center of it all, wearing a sparkling mermaid-style wedding gown covered in artificial diamonds. Beside her stood Julian in a custom tuxedo, smiling like a man who believed he had conquered the world. Together they looked like the perfect high society couple pulled straight from the cover of a luxury magazine. Elena looked radiant, victorious, certain she had escaped the muddy ruins of my family forever. Then Fergus and I stepped out of a black limousine at the entrance of the ballroom. We wore tailored suits handcrafted in London. Every trace of dirt, mud, and farm life had vanished. What remained was the quiet presence of men who truly understood power. The moment Elena saw us standing at the doors, her expression changed instantly. She grabbed the edge of her wedding dress and stormed toward us, fury burning in her eyes. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. "Who allowed filthy, mud-covered people like you to ruin my wedding day?" She turned toward security guards nearby. "Throw them out immediately. Don't let their poverty contaminate this place." Julian approached beside her, staring at us with open disdain. He had never met me personally as the chairman of Rodri Financial Group. Everything he knew about me came from Elena's stories about some broke old cattle farmer drowning in debt. "Listen, old man," Julian sneered. "I don't know how you managed to rent those suits, but this wedding isn't for scammers like you." He stepped closer. "Leave now before I call the police." Fergus tensed beside me, ready to move forward, but I calmly stopped him with one hand. Then, I slowly looked around the magnificent ballroom. Everything sparkled beautifully. But every chandelier, every bottle of champagne, every flower arrangement, every diamond stitched into Elena's dress, had been built upon lies and borrowed money. "Are you absolutely certain you want me to leave, Elena?" I asked quietly. "I came to give you a wedding gift you'll never forget." "Anything from you is garbage," Elena snapped viciously. "Get out. I don't want to see your pathetic poor faces for another second." She ordered security to drag us away. Whispers immediately spread through the guests. Elena smirked, proudly convinced she had finally erased every trace of her past. In her mind, she had already won this game completely. If you've stayed with this story this far, then I know it's touched something inside you. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like so you won't miss what happens next. But what Elena didn't realize was that the moment the wedding music began, the funeral bells for Julian's empire had already started ringing. In my hand rested a tablet directly connected to the central banking system and the financial recovery network of Rodri Financial Group. One simple touch. That was all it would take. One touch, and the entire glamorous fantasy Elena had fought so hard to enter would shatter like glass in front of every guest in that ballroom. The horrifying truth behind the debt guarantees Elena had signed was about to be exposed for the entire city to see. The soft wedding music suddenly died in the middle of the ceremony. A second later, my voice echoed through the ballroom speakers, calm, deep, and impossible to ignore. The entire hall fell silent. Every guest turned toward me as I slowly walked onto the main stage. Julian's face drained of all color. His lips trembled, but no words came out. Elena, however, was still screaming in fury. "You crazy old man," she shouted. "What the hell are you doing?" She pointed wildly toward security. "Why hasn't anyone thrown him out yet?" I never even looked at her. My eyes remained fixed directly on Julian. "Good evening, Julian," I said calmly. "It seems you forgot about an important appointment scheduled for 9 o'clock this morning at my office." I paused. "My name is Rodri, chairman of the financial corporation you currently owe $3 million. The silence inside the ballroom became suffocating. "And I'm not here to attend your wedding," I continued coldly. "I'm here to execute a full asset seizure order effective immediately." The ballroom exploded into chaos. Whispers spread like wildfire across the crowd. Elena froze completely. Her eyes darted back and forth between Julian and me. "Chairman," she whispered shakily. You're just some old cattle farmer." She grabbed Julian's arm desperately. "Julian, say something." Julian collapsed onto his knees. Sweat poured down his face. "Elena, you don't understand," he stammered weakly. "It's not what you think." At that exact moment, a team of attorneys and economic enforcement officers entered the ballroom, carrying official documents stamped with bright red court seals. One of the legal representatives stepped forward. "Miss Elena," the woman announced, "professionally under court authorization, and according to the debt guarantee agreements you signed last week, all personal assets currently under your name are now subject to immediate financial seizure to repay the outstanding debts of Mr. Julian." Elena stared at the papers in horror. Her entire body trembled violently. "I only signed documents for our villa purchase," she whispered. Then she turned toward Julian in panic. "You told me those were property papers for our future house." Julian couldn't even lift his head anymore. All he could do was kneel there, begging for forgiveness. Suddenly, Elena snapped. She screamed like a wounded animal and began striking Julian repeatedly with both hands. "You liar," she shrieked hysterically. "You turned me into a debtor." Meanwhile, the seizure officers immediately began inventory procedures inside the ballroom itself. They demanded Elena surrender the engagement ring and diamond earrings on the spot because the jewelry had been purchased using illegally borrowed funds. Elena cried while fighting desperately against them. During the struggle, her expensive wedding dress tore apart piece by piece. The elegant, arrogant bride who had once mocked my family now looked pitiful, broken, and completely humiliated in front of hundreds of guests. And I simply stood there calmly, watching the curtain finally fall. Every luxury dinner she enjoyed, every designer handbag she flaunted, every glamorous gift she proudly displayed online, had become chains tightening around her own throat. Then Elena suddenly turned toward Fergus with desperate eyes. She stumbled forward, almost collapsing at his feet. "Fergus, please help me," she sobbed. "I was tricked. I still love you." But Fergus quietly stepped backward. One single step. A step that destroyed the final piece of hope she had left. The truth had finally been exposed in the cruelest possible way. Yet even now, Elena still did not know the final secret hidden behind the filthy little farm she once despised. And when she discovered it, the regret would haunt her for the rest of her life. Elena collapsed onto the cold marble floor. Around her lay the shattered remains of the luxury dream she had chased so desperately. Security officers removed the final necklace from around her neck, while Julian was dragged away in humiliation. Her swollen eyes turned toward me, overflowing with desperate regret that felt far too late to be real. Then she crawled toward Fergus. "Fergus, I was wrong," she sobbed. "He manipulated me. Please, take me back to the farm." Tears streamed down her ruined makeup. "I'll work. I'll help repay your father's debts. I don't need luxury anymore." I stepped forward slowly. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out the engagement ring she had thrown into the plate of leftovers weeks earlier. I let it fall onto the floor directly in front of her. "Did you forget something, Elena?" I asked calmly. "The farm wasn't ours." A faint smile crossed my face. "That's what I told you. And you believed it instantly, Because the moment you no longer saw profit in us, you stopped seeing us as human beings. Then I nodded toward my assistant. The massive ballroom screen flickered to life. A video began playing. At first it showed the same old wooden farmhouse Elena had mocked with such disgust. But then the camera slowly pulled back farther, and farther, until thousands of acres of fertile land appeared across the screen. Modern processing facilities, private distribution centers, corporate towers carrying the Rodri Financial Group emblem, massive growth charts, investment portfolios, entire industries connected to my name. Gasps spread throughout the ballroom. The truth, I announced firmly, is that my family was never bankrupt. The farm was never a symbol of poverty. It was where I chose to protect my roots. I looked directly into Elena's shattered eyes. That farm was the final test for the woman entering this family. My voice hardened. And you failed the moment your shoes touched the mud. Elena stared at the screen in complete disbelief. The realization crushed her harder than the debt ever could. She had thrown away a real empire, only to chase a fake millionaire built entirely from lies. I placed a hand on Fergus's shoulder. Come on, son. We're leaving. Fergus looked at Elena one final time, but there was no heartbreak left in his eyes anymore. Only maturity, only clarity. He finally understood the true value of family. And he finally understood that loyalty and kindness are things money can never buy. Behind us, Elena broke down screaming and begging for another chance as we walked toward the limousine outside. But the car door slammed shut before she could reach us. As the city sunset painted the skyline gold outside the window, I quietly reflected on everything that had happened. Life always moves in circles. Those who plant storms eventually drown in them. Elena would spend years paying for the consequences of her own greed. And maybe that was the only lesson people like her ever truly understand. This story is a warning to anyone who judges human worth only by appearances. Live honestly, because the truth always finds a way to reveal itself when you least expect it. Join our community by liking and subscribing for more raw, emotional family stories. And as always, thank you for being part of this space. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Elena deserved a second chance? Or was this the fairest ending possible for betrayal like hers? Let me know your thoughts below. And thank you for staying with me until the very last moment of this story.